So hello everyone, good morning, and for those of you who are joining us from other regions elsewhere around the world, it's either maybe a good afternoon or even a good evening. But to all of you, a very warm welcome to this year's European 5G conference. It's the 6th annual edition of the conference, so welcome to you all. My name is Dan Kraft, and on behalf of everybody at Forum Europe, I'd just like to say how great it is to have you all with us here again today. We have almost 1,200 people registered for the conference this year, and I think it's the first time ever we've actually got more than 100 different countries represented. There's 101 countries in total that we've had registrations for, so from across Europe, from across the rest of the world, which really is fantastic. And I think it is one of the benefits of the conferences in this virtual format. It does really increase the reach and the accessibility of the event for people from outside the region. So welcome again to you all, and as I said, we're really delighted to have you all with us today. So this year we had hoped initially to be able to return to a format that would allow at least some of us to be together in person in Brussels, but unfortunately those plans were scuppered by Omicron, and once again we're meeting again here in a virtual environment. But we have a fantastic lineup of speakers who are going to be joining us over the course of 10 different sessions that we have scheduled for the next 2 days. And we're really looking forward to what I'm sure are going to be some really interesting discussions. And as ever, we really want all of you out there to get involved in the discussions as well. All of the sessions that are taking place are going to be discussion-based and very interactive, with time built in throughout the whole program for all of you to give questions, which we passed on to speakers and will be addressed as part of the panels that we have. So please do make sure that you're using the various interactive features on the platform. Those of you who haven't joined us before, the platform is very easy to navigate and to find the different ways that you can use that. The main thing is the chat room on the right-hand side of your screen. So you can use the chat area on the right-hand side of your screen to add your comments, add your questions, add any other thoughts that you have on the discussions that are taking place. And as I said, those will be passed to our moderators and to the speakers who'll be able to bring those into discussion at various points during the event. I also wanted to quickly now just mention on the left-hand side of your screen, you will find a on-demand area. So the showcase sessions this year are going to be taking place a little bit different to how they did previously. For those of you who've joined us before, the showcase sessions are available throughout the whole duration of the event for you to watch when you at your convenience. Those of you who joined us before will know the showcase sessions are all hosted by some of our sponsor and partner organizations, and provides an opportunity to go into a bit more detail in some of the key themes that are being covered in the main sessions at the event. So please do make sure you're visiting the on-demand area and looking at those showcase sessions at some point during the event. As you can see, we have 5 of our partners who are running sessions on various issues, on 6 gigahertz band, on Wi-Fi connectivity, looking at millimeter wave, and other various aspects of 5G connectivity. So please do make sure you do visit those, and you'll be able to watch those at your convenience throughout the whole duration of the event. So in a second, we're going to be kicking things off with our opening keynote presentation today. But before we do that, there are a couple more things I just wanted to mention on the housekeeping side. So first of all, I wanted to say a huge thank you to all of our sponsor and partner organizations who've supported the event this year. You can see the logo for all those organizations on the banner over my shoulder and also on the screen next to me now. Really do appreciate, as ever, the support of all of our sponsors and our partners. Without them, the event would not be possible. So thank you to each and every one of you for the support that you provide us. Next, I wanted to mention the hashtag for the event. So the hashtag we have for the conference this year is hashtag EU5GConf. If I bring that up, actually the program, which I'll be doing in a second anyway. So you can see the hashtag at the top of the screen here, hashtag EU5GConf. So if you're going to be tweeting about the event, posting anything on social media, please use that hashtag. And obviously that'll also enable you to see what others are posting about the event and their comments and thoughts as well. Next on to the program for today. So you can see we have 5 separate sessions running today, as well as a couple of keynote presentations and thinking points. So throughout the course of the day, we're going to be covering a lot of different issues. We're going to be starting very shortly with Piers, who's going to be joining us for his keynote presentation, leading on to a session on the path to the digital decade. And then we're going to be looking at aspects such as 5G funding for 5G deployment, cybersecurity, and looking maybe a bit even beyond 5G and looking towards what the next steps are as we move towards 6G as well. So lots happening. All of the presentations and all of the sessions today are going to be recorded, and there will be a link available to you, which will be made available immediately after the event, and is also on the reception area, which will allow you to download and view back anything that you might miss today. So please do also make use of that if you need to. So lots going on. So I think it's probably time that we should get started. So now it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage our moderator for both the keynote presentations and also the first session that we're going to be having following that. So I'd like to welcome George Serenci to the stage from Squire Patton Boggs. George, welcome. Great to have you with us. As I said, we've got a busy day ahead of us, and starting off with the keynote and then the first panel, which I know you're going to be leading on. So looking forward to it. And without further ado, I will pass over to yourself.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the European 5G Conference 2022, also from my side. Now, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Piers O'Donoghue. Piers is Director of Future Networks at DG Connect, the European Commission, and he will give us the opening keynote for this very timely conference. Piers, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, George, and good morning to everybody. Thank you once again to Forum Europe for organizing this important conference. There is continuity and change because we were already here a year ago, but a lot has happened. And at last year's conference, I talked about a list of ambitious initiatives that were in front of us for that year. And now I can look back and say, well, we have delivered as planned, but now we have to implement. And that is actually the crucial issue. Because of what it means for our digital ambitions. And that's where I'd like to start, because we have proposed a new policy program, which is the Common Path to the Digital Decade. Now, that will be the subject of the first session that George is going to be moderating in a few moments. And my colleague, Rita Wezenbeck, who's the director responsible for connectivity and who played a key role in the development of the program, she will address that in some detail. But let me just stress that the digital policy program is a real game changer, because for more than a decade, we had tried to achieve a dynamic and a consistent digital landscape in Europe, starting with the digital agenda back in 2010. However, we had to come to the conclusion that there were still clear divergences between the digital readiness of member states. And the digital policy program is aimed to break that logjam and to establish genuine cooperation between member states at the EU level and between member states themselves. Because our digital transformation, which is one of the 2 key priorities of this European Commission, it's a common effort. European capabilities require a critical mass of funding. We need all of the actors to be aligned. We need to avoid duplication of effort and investment in order to focus our resources on achieving our objectives. So there is a clear cross-border dimension, and in those cases, the policy program is providing us with a new instrument. That's the European Digital Infrastructure Consortium, or EDIC, which will support multi-country projects which have strategic importance. And it will also complement the digital projects that we're doing through the new important projects of common European interest, including on cloud and on microelectronics, through the joint undertakings, especially the Smart Networks and Services Joint Undertaking, which I'll mention in a minute, and of course other instruments that colleagues and participants today are perhaps more familiar with. But that cross-border cooperation became particularly evident in the work that we were doing with the member states for the Recovery and Resilience Fund post-COVID, where we were developing for the first time targeted and strategic multi-country projects. And they are crucial for the development of infrastructure and services across Europe's internal borders. It can help to accelerate the deployment of cross-border 5G, particularly by focusing on the cross-border corridors, which are also a major life-scale trial for connected and automated mobility, which is a key application of 5G. And of course, it will lead to the implementation of distributed cloud infrastructure of the next generation. So those are several key strategic elements and challenges that will be addressed by these multi-country projects under the RRF, using, of course, member states' own funding and, of course, funding coming from the European Union. Member states have plans to submit investment proposals to the upcoming Connecting Europe facility, and I hope that some of those potential partners are listening in today, because again of the importance of 5G and the cross-border corridors for our tactic. And I've said to you that it is getting everybody to share resources, and the Connecting Europe facility is a key way of ensuring that we add to the funding which regions and member states are putting into these important 5G developments. We could devote up to €1 billion to kickstart wide-scale deployment along transport paths, and that is significant when we think about the importance of transport and logistics in the rollout of 5G and many of the Internet of Things technologies that we have been working on. Now, underpinning that investment, we have to also look at the regulatory framework that supports investments, in particular in regards to state aid rules, which do require some modernization when we think about these high-value 5G applications, their importance for the economy, for society. Just think of e-health or connected mobility, and it's important for governments and regions. So the size and strategic importance of these projects will obviously create a lot of opportunities, but put pressure on us, including in the Commission, to deal with public support projects. Now, my colleague Rita, who works closely with our colleagues in DG Competition, will highlight the latest developments, including on the ongoing review of the broadband state aid guidelines. So I'd like to move on to some of the other key issues that I also mentioned last year. The next and very important item on that list was cybersecurity. And I'd just like to say a few words about that now, because it is still so relevant, more relevant perhaps, as illustrated by the high-profile attacks, even that suffered recently by Ukraine. And this is a subject that is very closely linked to strict national competences, defense, national intelligence, national security. But of course, we have to work together. While we aim at a high level of security, we also need to preserve the functioning of the single market. And that is why, with our cybersecurity strategy, we have been leading the efforts for a secure digitalization, and one in which we collectively in Europe set a high level of protection as being the norm, the standard to which everybody must aspire. And again, looking at the digital policy program, the deployment of secure 5G networks is a key priority, and that security is an element that we have to build in from the outset. And to that end, we've been taking strong actions to reinforce the security of 5G networks. You all are familiar with the EU toolbox of risk mitigating measures, and that is something which is currently being implemented at national level. Some of you may have heard just yesterday of the report of the European Court of Auditors, which acknowledges that the Commission has reacted swiftly to address 5G security risks when they became an issue. And we're also glad to see that the report that member states do recognize that the Commission's and ENISA's support is very useful and important when implementing the toolbox. A large number of member states are already engaged in the process of strengthening security requirements on the basis of the EU toolbox for their 5G networks. And we continue to work closely with the member states and with ENISA in order to exchange good practices, to promote further alignment of approaches, and to ensure that high level of security that we all need. So it's obviously work in progress. New threats are developing and new technological capabilities are emerging, and we must be able to adapt to those new technologies and services as they do develop. But we also have to streamline cybersecurity so that it is coherent with the technology, so that it works with other technologies, and so that we are at all times in a position to anticipate threat and to work together to overcome them. And now the report of the Court of Auditors has also rightfully pinpointed 5G security as an area that requires continuous improvement. It has to be put in the perspective of the whole telecom value chain, as we used to call it, and not just at the level of operators. There are responsibilities on other actors and stakeholders also. And we believe that this is the balance of interests that has been achieved with the 5G security toolbox adopted by the member states and the Commission. However, there are elements where we cannot, at the moment, fully align ourselves with what the court has said on one or two issues where they have been critical, and that is, of course, their job. And one of them is in relation to the fostering of a concerted approach to 5G security among member states. That is exactly what the Commission sought to do, while fully respecting the national competences of member states and, of course, in some cases, different approaches towards 5G security, which meant that we have to have a toolbox approach, allowing the member states to choose from the most appropriate mechanisms for them in their context to actually achieve the security that we want to see. So that is something which we will, of course, be addressing very closely to ensure that we continue to have a coherent approach as it is evolved. And again, this will be a subject of discussion later on in the conference. Another element which has an impact in this area is, of course, the cooperation with global players and our competitors, but also our like-minded partners. We trust that the cooperation with the United States in the context of the new Trade and Technology Council will help us to have a more coordinated approach on a wider geographical basis, and also, of course, to foster common approaches to 5G cybersecurity. And that's where we have to be particularly forward-looking in regards to sensitive new technologies, such, for example, as microchips, but also artificial intelligence, particularly as AI becomes an increasing factor in the operation of AI and as one of the core services or technologies which 5G delivers. Moving on from the cybersecurity angle then, we have to look at other new developments such as that with regard to Open RAN. Now, a lot has been said and written about Open RAN over the last year. It has certainly gained in visibility since we last met together. And it is obvious that Open RAN will benefit from the trend towards network disaggregation, virtualization, and the general softwareization of all elements of the network. Now, there is obviously a need for the delivery of the technology and the architecture, which is what Open RAN is, to actually deliver on some of the hype that we have seen so far, which we do believe will happen. But of course, we have to have concerted efforts with regard to the research, and also to make sure that it does not introduce greater challenges with regard to security or energy use, etc., etc. Europe is already embracing this technological change. We plan to further support Open RAN technology as part of the research and innovation activities under Horizon Europe, particularly in areas like network virtualization, cloudification, and so on. And looking forward to future 6G architectures, which may be different from the service-based architecture that we have seen up to and including for 5G. So we want to stimulate startups, innovate European players in this field of disaggregated networks, and also to ensure that Europe is at the forefront of developments with regard to new service provision, but also, of course, with regard to new ways of building and operating communications networks just as those networks, just as those services are integrated into a continuous computing chain involving IoT, sensors, AI, and the full value chain that so much of our digital strategy has been focused on over the last 2 to 3 years. So there are a lot of things to be done before Open RAN becomes a commercial reality. And certainly what we do not want to do is to undermine the position of those key global players that are based in Europe and who are critical to the development of secure, advanced and innovative 5G technologies, and whom we are confident will be in the lead with regard to the development of technologies beyond 5G towards 6G. It's not only a technical question, therefore, it's one of industrial sovereignty and of course, ensuring that we have cooperation at a global level on efficient and secure systems, as well as system integration, and ensuring that we are also fully aligned on standards. So that is a lot going on with regard to Open RAN. There is work going on the cybersecurity elements, where we have a security assessment by the NIS working group, and that we hope will give its first results in the spring. So this is something which will be a very important issue to keep close watch of in the coming year. And I did mention briefly that, of course, another challenge is linked to energy consumption. And here we have to, across all of the connectivity value chain, throughout our communications and computing technologies, we now have a higher standard to aspire to and to deliver on very quickly if Europe is to meet its very ambitious Green Deal objectives with regard to reducing carbon reliability, to reducing our footprint, and ensuring that not only do new technologies such as 5G help other sectors to meet their Green Deal goals, but of course to walk the talk, to ensure that communications technologies and compute technologies are themselves highly energy efficient and increasingly energy efficient, even as that technology is rolled out. So the last point is, of course, in relation to Open RAN, that we cannot allow a situation in which hopes with regard to the future potential of Open RAN slows down or creates uncertainties about investments that we need now in 5G technologies, which are so important because of their economic potential for all sectors of the economy. And looking at the developments, the European Union has not been waiting. We have now in place the Smart Networks and Services Joint Undertaking, which is one of the key tools which we will use in the development with industry of advanced 5G and beyond 5G services, looking at the development of 6G technologies as well. If we look into the future, digital sovereignty is one of the key priorities of the current French presidency, and there will be a ministerial conference on digital sovereignty in a couple of weeks in Paris. And the Smart Networks and Services Joint Undertaking is very critical as an example of what Europe can do in that regard. We have this as a public-private partnership, but one in which, for the first time, the member states have a closer role with regard to advising because of the strategic importance of these technologies. And while it is still focused on research and innovation, it now has a much wider remit than was the case, for example, in regards to 5G under the 5GPP. Funding is, of course, very important, but the other elements are contributing to digital sovereignty. We have a clear mandate to focus the activities of the new partnership much closer to the strategic interests of the European economy, in other words, the strategic interests of European industry, in order to strengthen our technological capacity, as well, of course, as our overall resilience in the telecom value chain. And that is something which does justify the greater involvement of member states in advising with regards to the focus of research and innovation, but also, of course, playing their responsibilities with regard to the rollout of secure, advanced technologies and networks, which is something that we hope to work closer and closer together in the future. The new model, as it were, has the private stakeholders holding 50% of the votes in the governing board, with the Commission on the other side of the table working closely with them, so that we can have a coordinated work program and also have an efficient process for the development of projects which are responding to these strategic challenges of beyond 5G and 6G. We want to create synergies between EU level actions and of course national programs, of which there are many. And these are very important as, again, as I said at the start, we seek to focus our efforts to work together with regard to the key challenges for Europe's digital decade and beyond. So there you are. I came with a list from last year, but I have shown you how that list now looks forward to the things that we have to do in 2022 and beyond, looking at our digital decade. So this year, 2022, it's not a year of announcements, but it's a year of execution and implementation. So the devil is in the details, and that is where we hope to work with you, the stakeholders in industry, in civil society, and in government, to ensure that we deliver not just on our 5G vision, but on our digital vision for Europe, with regard to a computing continuum that will go from the core networks right through out to the edge and beyond, as we seek to implement and integrate IoT networks technologies, and of course provide that single secure platform for data processing that will be the basis for the advanced digital economy in Europe. We still have to have the digital policy program passed into legislation, hopefully not too late in the year. My colleagues will speak to that in the next sessions. And we do also have to have a new and forward-looking state aid doctrine, so that member states and industry can both be clear about what can be achieved, what is possible. So we have to set up a series of ambitious projects with your cooperation, matching the significant public funding that is available, and of course, ensuring that it is secure by design and by implementation, and that it reinforces Europe's sovereign and digital autonomy. Whatever is the result, we certainly can't be blamed for doing too little too late. But of course, now we will be judged on the basis of implementation and delivery. Today's conference will be a very useful opportunity to discuss some of these challenges, and I really look forward to it. So thank you very much, and back to you, George.
Yeah, thank you, Piers. That was a real 360-degree overview of this very challenging and forward-looking program. We've got one question from Manuel Marti from Policy Tracker here. He was asking, what's the European Commission response to the ECA claims that the majority of the member states will miss the 2025 and 2030 targets? Is that a concern for the Commission? And a follow-up question also, will the Commission develop a common definition of 5G services given the recommendations by the ECA?
Well, thank you. I did try to address the ECA. We knew that that would be an issue, and certainly for a journalist like Martin, he'd love to get a headline on this. First of all, we are ourselves in discussion with the member states with regard to some areas where, yes, we do see challenges with regard to our 2025 challenges and targets. And the one that we have focused on most, which will be discussed again at the conference today, is of course in relation to spectrum licensing, which is the critical resource in order for the private sector, for operators to actually be able to roll out the technologies. And that is something where we have expressed concerns. But as we have said publicly already in response to the European Court, it is clearly something that is of critical importance. But it was not the case when we came out with the original 5G action plan that we could force the member states to license the spectrum immediately. In some cases, it had to be freed. And as you know, George, from your long experience in this area as a regulator, in member states still have competence with regard to the licensing process. There are other areas where we were certainly subject to some comment by the court with regard to not defining objectives, and you just mentioned services as precisely enough. But the challenge there is, of course, that we would have run the risk of not being technology neutral in the sense that we would have defined services before they were actually defined or made clear by the technology research that is still going on. We want to leave the space for innovation. We made it clear from the start that our 5G approach was favoring sectoral delivery of services to industry. And that approach, favoring the verticals, as I've called it, is something that was different from the United States and other trading partners, but which is clearly now won out, and that is the approach which industry across the world is taking to 5G development. So I don't think that we needed to define services more precisely than was the case, because we wanted the industry to find the demand that would lead to proper investment, and that appears to be the case that's coming through now. Of course, it is slower than the Commission wants, but these have been 2 very challenging years because of COVID, and we do hope that we will now be able to speed up as we put in place the investment that's coming through from the RRF and, of course, from the Digital Decade Programme.
Thank you very much, Piers. First for your very good keynote, and secondly for answering the question from Manuel Marti. Now it's my pleasure to directly move on to the first session. And again, from this point, a warm welcome to all of you for the first session of the European 5G Conference 2020. And our session addresses a couple of crucial issues. It is entitled "The Path to the Digital Decade, Accelerating 5G Rollout Across Europe." My name is Georg Serenci, and I'm a senior advisor to global law firm Squire Box. And today I have the honor to moderate the discussion of our distinguished speakers. I will now introduce our speakers in the order of their appearance, and each speaker will give then their introductory statement in 5 minutes. We start with Rita Weisenbeek. She is Director Connectivity at DG Connect at the European Commission, and she's followed by Annemarie Sipkes, BEREC Chairperson 2022, and she's Director Telecommunication, Transport and Postal Services Department at the Netherlands Authority for Consumers and Markets, ACM. Arti Holla Maini is Secretary General of Global Satellite Operators Association, and she will provide us her view from a satellite operator's perspective. Arti will be followed by Marit Palovirta. Marit is Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs at ETNO, the Industry Association. And last but not least, we have Jean-Pierre Faizan. He is Chair of the Communication Working Group European Wireless Infrastructure Association. I will now give the floor to Rita Weisenbeek and ask her view on what the new concrete measures and policy relating to 5G were announced as part of the Path to the Digital Decade framework. And she will address, as I understood, 3 important areas: the importance of connectivity and new policy targets. She will also go to Digital Decade process state of play and will elaborate on a set of new measures and policies. Rita, the floor is yours.
Yes, so good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation for this very timely and interesting conference. Indeed, I would like to give a short introduction to what keeps us busy in 5G in the digital decade, discussing a bit the process and state of play, and the new measures and policies that we have put and are putting in place. So indeed, to start with the importance of connectivity and the new policy targets, I think it hardly needs to be said, and it is still said at every conference, in COVID times, broadband infrastructures play a crucial role to keep all of us connected, to keep students learning, and to keep the economy going. And they will be even more important to ensure a sustainable recovery of the society and economy. So connectivity is at the center of the European policy agenda. And when we speak about connectivity, we speak essentially about large-scale infrastructures, so backbones, 5G corridors, but also of the connection of sensors and actuators that are now more and more present in our life through AI and big data and IoT. So connectivity is also a conditio sine qua non for the digital economy that delivers to its citizens. So as you know, we have set new targets under the digital compass for the end of the decade, which say that every European household should have access to gigabit connectivity, and 5G should be available in all populated areas. And they add on and complement the 2025 targets set in 2016. Now, a word about the digital decade process. As already said by peers, the policy program sets in stone a comprehensive description of objectives that encompass the European way of the digital transformation based on our common values and interests. So the objectives are described extensively in the text, which means that they are human-centered, inclusive, secure, resilient, sovereign, and an open digital environment. To this end, the policy program recalls the targets that were already set in the Digital Compass communication of March. And the development of strategical capacities is key to European digital sovereignty. We want Europe to be a fully connected continent, equipped with the necessary infrastructure to tap into digital and the data economy. So that means we need to invest in world-leading infrastructure in order to remain competitive. That's why we have set these targets for fiber and 5G. So what is the state of play currently? The discussion in Council is ongoing almost as we speak. We are very happy at the Commission that the French presidency would like to progress fast. And in Parliament, the rapporteur from Renew aims to present a draft opinion end March. So that means that probably we can have a vote for the mandate for trilogues end May, and hopefully we can still start trilogues under the current presidency. Now, I saw that a question was, of course, we have already addressed that there will be an extensive collaborative process based on roadmaps. And the question was asked in the page on the conference, what is the balance between the delivery of a more binding process and also the avoidance of bureaucracy? So indeed, the system is based on national roadmaps that are handed in by member states and a consequent collaborative process in which there's a discussion with the Commission and the member states on how to improve the performance in order to get to the targets. I would say this is not a bureaucratic process. Much work has already been done in the recovery and resilience plans, but also in the national broadband plans and in connectivity roadmaps. So member states will also hand in the roadmap only once. So there will be further discussion and changes on the basis of the roadmap that they have presented. So this is why we think that this is not needlessly bureaucratic. So then the new measures and policy, well, there's regulatory measures and funding measures. On the regulatory side, we can obviously mention the European Electronic Communication Code that sets clear rules applicable across the Union. So the code in the context of 5G has provisions on spectrum, network sharing that are aimed at facilitating the rollout of 5G. There's also the review of the Broadband Cost Reduction Directive, probably very familiar to all of you, and the Connectivity Toolbox. Apart from that, there's the support for wireless networks such as 5G through actions based on spectrum, based on the Radio Spectrum Policy Program. And we have adopted, for instance, the implementing regulation on the characteristics of small area wireless access points. So that's the regulatory actions that we are taking. At the same time, at the EU level, there's an unprecedented use of EU funding also for investments. So you're all familiar with the Recovery and Resilience Facility, with the new cohesion funds, the agricultural funds, InvestEU, but also CEF Digital. So CEF Digital, very important to mention, a big fund worth 33 billion euros was adopted in June 2020. So the whole CEF regulation and the CEF Digital program has a budget of 2 billion euro just to devote to digital transition. The work program was adopted mid-December of CEF Digital, and the calls were issued on 16 January. Now, with this budget, this is the first program under the multi-annual framework that is directly managed by the Commission, through HADEA that is devoted to gigabit and 5G connectivity deployment. So in short, CEF Digital supports actions with respect to 5G corridors, to support 5G system deployment along transport path for connected and automated mobility with an amount of 1 billion euro and 80 million euros for 5G communities. So let me warmly invite you to read the work program and also the calls and follow the HADEA presentation that was done in the Information Day last week. We really hope for interesting and promising projects that can serve as examples. So there's the RRF, also probably very well known to the audience. This allows the Commission to raise funds to help member states implement reforms and investments in line with EU's priorities and also address the challenges identified in the country-specific recommendations of the European semester. It is there to support the twin transactions, to help the EU achieve its target of climate neutrality by 2050, and also set Europe on a path of digital transition, creating jobs and spurring growth. So we're very happy that the member states in their national plans have already exceeded the target of 20% for digital by submitting 27% of the investments that contribute to digital transition. Now, 5G in the RRF can be reflected in some figures that I can mention. So all 27 national plans mention 5G strategies. 11 of those will invest directly RRF budget in 5G. Some of those focus on 5G corridors, which we like very much, also as one of the projects that we favor in terms of facilitating cross-border cooperation by member states. Also, some focus on the rollout of 5G in broad areas, also in rural zones, and some will target municipalities and business parks or public safety users. So you will get more details on this, I understand, in session 2 by my colleague Eric Godia. And then the last issue that I still wanted to raise, and that I think is also very important to put on your radar screen, and that is in the context of funding, the Commission has also revised or is in the process of revising its state aid framework. So in this context, it is very important to mention that the general block exemption regulation for broadband state aid was revised, and also that we are now in the process of reviewing the state aid broadband guidelines. So the general block exemption regulation was revised and now offers the possibility to subsidize broadband rollout without the need for notification for the deployment of 4G or 5G mobile networks of up to 100 million per project euro and up to 150 million euro for aid awarded in the form of a financial instrument. So that at least enlarges the possibilities for smaller actions to take place without notification. So the exemption in the block exemption still covers the deployment of 5G mobile networks only where there's no 4G or superior connectivity. So that means that only in areas where there's not more than 3G, such subsidies can take place. However, there's also a revision underway of the guidelines on state aid for broadband networks, and that is opening this door slightly wider. And the Commission has indeed also included in the guidelines a framework to assess state aid to mobile networks, and also an annex with a methodology on how to map both fixed and mobile networks. And that framework, as I said, is a little bit wider than the general block exemption itself. So you've maybe seen that there's a public consultation on the network. And what I wanted to highlight today is important in the sense that an element of this consultation is that the Commission says we can define more elaborate criteria to decide where to intervene beyond the mere presence or absence of a 4G signal. And so the Commission shares this interest to define in a precise manner the quality of service, and basically invites also in the consultation that member states and interested parties can identify when a market failure, when the market needs a higher quality 4G or 5G network in order to align also the state aid that can be accepted on end user needs. So this will be based on the description of the sufficient quality services that satisfy the evolving needs of users. So in this context, it's very important that the stakeholder community looks at this and also contributes on the perception of mobile user needs. So just to highlight to you that the consultation remains open until the 11th of February. Now, in addition, in state aid, there is an annex that also creates more detailed and more refined rules with respect to the mapping of existing and future mobile networks. So also in that context, we move to a more sophisticated approach. Now, I will not continue any longer. So I have mentioned a number of elements through which we at the Commission are helping the design and the rollout of 5G networks. And I'm looking forward to the discussion with the other panel members.
Thank you, Rita. That was a great and comprehensive overview, very helpful indeed. Now, as a former regulator and former BEREC chairman, it's my special pleasure to move on to the second speaker, Annemarie Sipkes. Annemarie, can you perhaps elaborate on the point to what extent will the proposals included in the framework of potential multi-country initiatives help facilitate EU countries joining forces to make it easier for them to raise funding from existing EU programs and private investors? Annemarie, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, George, and thank you for that introduction. I am very aware that as a BEREC chair, I stand in a long line of distinguished people who have been allowed to chair the independent regulators of Europe. I think I will not be the first and definitely not the last to underline that our objective at BEREC is for the coming years is also promoting full connectivity and incentivize investments in 5G and fiber. As Rita already mentioned, I think we all understand the importance of high-speed connectivity for the people and businesses in Europe. In that sense, it is not very encouraging that at the moment only 14% of populated areas in the EU have 5G and only 59% have ultra-high speed gigabit coverage. So fast rollout of 5G networks is a prerequisite for the long-term competitiveness and sustainability of the EU. And 5G, of course, is a topic that BEREC monitors actively and closely as the market develops. Let me make, George, in response to your question, my first point would be that in all the work that we as NRAs are doing, we are very aware that 5G is such an encompassing technological development, which has such so many aspects, that a lot of work looking back at what we have been doing the last work is also based on cooperation with other parties. No single agent or organization can help EU achieve its objectives on its own. For example, if we look at the work that we have been doing on giving fact-based information to the public on EMF questions that they've had, where we have cooperated with the Commission, with ETNO, with the WHO on making sure that we have all the same fact-based information to answer the uncertainties. Another aspect is security, where with the toolbox that Rita already mentioned, we have been working closely with ENISA to make sure that we are all aligned in our efforts to make sure that Europe gets a 5G rollout that is meeting societal needs. Focusing now on the things that BEREC has that we as regulators can specifically contribute, I think one of the less visible but very important aspects is the treatment of backhaul. And concerning the regulatory treatment of backhaul, nearly half of BEREC members include backhaul in their markets in Market 2, as we call it now, or Market 4, as we used to call it under the 2014 regime. And around 25% of them find this market to be competitive. And part of the NRAs regulate backhaul as an ancillary service in Market 1, the new numbers, or Market 3B, as it was used to call. And there seems also to be a strong case for harmonizing the regulatory approach of backhaul regulation. And we have issued a public consultation on the outcome of our studies in this, and we'll publish the final results in March. So backhaul is very much on our agenda this year, and helping encourage the investment and access of backhaul. The second thing I'd like to draw your attention to with respect to how can we encourage investment and private investment into the very high capacity networks with a special attention for 5G, is that we are planning to update our guidelines. As you may be aware, is that the new code has given us a specific framework to deal with very high capacity networks. Article 3 of the code specifies its general objectives, including promoting connectivity and access to and take-up of very high capacity networks. And it gives us a kind of a different framework to treat investors and to treat the deployment of these networks. But the 5G part of the guidelines was still, let's say, insufficiently developed when the guidelines were drawn up. So the definition of the 5G part is not up to standards. So if we are going to, in the way that we are going to update it, we will make sure that we can give, based on the code, appropriate incentives for investment in new very high capacity networks that support innovation in content-rich internet services and strengthen the international competitiveness. This objective, as I said, of promoting the widespread deployment and take-up of very high capacity networks is at the core of the EU's ambition towards a gigabit society. And therefore, it is very important that we make sure that our regulatory treatment of exactly these very high capacity networks is in line with our European ambitions. And that is what we will do by updating the guidelines this year. Although we are very focused and determined to make sure that we can do anything we can to help Europe meeting its connectivity targets, we are only helping in laying the foundation. We expect the digital transition to sprout and flourish on this foundation by, for example, verticals taking advantage of the seemingly endless possibilities of 5G. So, as regulators, we are taking on board this ambition and hope that by laying the foundation, we can help develop a healthy market dynamics that will help Europe's citizens and businesses to reap the benefits of 5G in total. And at that, George, I think I'll leave it. I'm very looking forward to the other contributions.
You're on mute, George.
Still.
No, you're still on mute, George.
Sorry.
Perfect.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I think your presentation demonstrated clearly that there is enough on the table at the regulators' desks, and there is a lot to do for the next couple of years. I'm now inviting Arti Holler-Maini to give us her intro statement. And I'm very much looking forward to hear what can be done with satellites and satellite constellations to accelerate 5G and to improve connectivity. Arti, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Georg. I'm delighted to be here again. And indeed, we are now here as GSOA, the Global Satellite Operators Association, having welcomed 7 new members in January this year to our membership. Let me start by saying, of course, satellites are, in our view, absolutely needed to realize 5G in Europe. And there are various reasons for that. And the market presents us also different examples that show that. Let me speak to a couple of them. In the UK, BT is using satellite for coverage, resilience, and in the future to ensure the provision of more critical services requiring higher reliability as well. In Spain, we see nearby a 5G terrestrial technology provider leveraging satellite backhaul to enable services like edge computing in more remote and isolated areas. This is very recent. Virgin O2 is leveraging satellite for Project Darwin for connected and automated vehicles. It's not just for the continuity of service across all areas, but also to make the communications more secure, because satellite connections have fewer points of entry in terms of gateways and hubs, and because the access to the physical layer is typically less known and therefore harder to attack. In Greece, we see Vodafone Greece successfully trialing satellite for 5G backhaul to extend coverage including to the islands. There are other 5G related services such as cloud computing, and we see that cloud providers have been partnering with satellite operators, many SO members, to enable direct one-hop, very high capacity connections to the cloud from anywhere in the world. And of course, various European airlines are offering aero connectivity for their passengers on long-haul flights as well, thanks to satellite. The second point I would make is that satellites are needed to enable the 100 megabit per second for all by 2025 objective set by the gigabit communication. I know that the target talks about being upgradable to 1 gigabit per second, but when we still have around 5 million households in the Union who don't even have the 30 megabit per second that Commissioner Kroes called for back by 2020 in her digital agenda, I'm not sure that we can have a meaningful conversation about really enabling 1 gigabit per second connectivity for all. The third point I'd like to make is that satellites are an essential component of Europe's digital competitiveness and recovery. Commissioner Breton is trying to address this with his EU space-based secure connectivity initiative in the face of dynamic developments taking place in other parts of the world. He realizes that this is as much about connecting Europeans as it is about making sure that Europe doesn't remain a customer of next generation services and capabilities that are developed elsewhere. It's about making sure that Europe can develop the jobs, the skills, the knowledge, and the business ecosystems within the Union and benefit from emerging areas of economic opportunity, which do lie in digital and where satellite is a critical component, because no other technology has the reach that satellite does. The next point I'd like to make is that NTN standardization work in 3GPP has moved forward largely due to the support of mobile operators. We already have 5G new radio NTN and NB-IoT NTN specifications coming out with release 17 in a couple of months. And in December 2021, the RAN plenary of 3GPP approved a new work item for release 18 to look at enhancing the 5G NR NTN specifications and deploying satellite services in above 10 gigahertz bands. They're starting with a study specifically looking at VSAT eSIMs, so communications on the move, using the harmonized Ka band, including 28 gigahertz as the reference. But all of this is not some theoretical exercise. Anybody who's been involved in 3GPP work items can tell you how ferocious the battle is to secure time units for new work items. And without broad market support, it doesn't happen. But it is happening for NTN. And as I said, it's largely due to the interest shown in 3GPP in these matters by mobile operators and other companies. 2021 also saw the first mobility demonstration using the 3GPP 5G NTN protocol stack over a GEO satellite received by a land mobile terminal at the end of last year. Now, that sounds like some really technical thing. Of course it was, but if you put that into perspective, that has huge potential for connected vehicles in the EU in the future. It could be autonomous vehicles. It could be connected ambulances in rural areas. And isn't that part of the vision that we have for the future Europe? But then when you match that with what the Commission's revision of the broadband state aid guidelines says, for example, for hospitals, it's not good enough because it needs 1 gigabit per second up and download speeds to fall within the definition of what is eligible, etc. So with that, I think I would say that the Commission is, in our view, at risk of missing its targets yet again. Because this kind of a binary approach, which defines absolute targets of 1 gigabit per second, misses the point, as I just made with that example. And more importantly, it excludes satellite, it excludes Wi-Fi, so it excludes technologies and picks winners, despite the crucial role of these technologies. Secondly, it lacks up-to-date knowledge of satellite systems. This really concerns me. When we look at the Commission's revision of the Broadband State Aid Guidelines, I'm quoting, currently available satellites in the Union are still not able to provide ultra-fast broadband services, which are defined as 100 megabit per second download speed. This is completely incorrect. And on the side, you can see one example of a satellite service provider, Eurona in Spain, for example. So, you can take this slide down, thank you. The other reason why we fear that the Commission risks missing its targets is the lack of incentives and information that is given to member states to invest in satellite systems when they're the only option for connectivity, especially at a time of recovery as we emerge from pandemic lockdowns. And here I want to reflect back to the 2009 recovery plan. At that time, the Commission stated clearly what was eligible for funding, and they included not just the creation of broadband infrastructure, but also enabling access to broadband infrastructure, including backhaul facilities and ground equipment. And they stated specifically fixed, terrestrial, wireless, satellite-based, or a combination of technologies. Again, in the present state aid guideline proposal, vouchers only cover end user equipment, such as modems and routers. So we have moved away from satellite broadband being the initial purchase and installation of the dish and the modem as being eligible. And that's really concerning. What I think we're seeing is two directorate generals working at cross purposes. We have DG DEFIS, which is embracing SATCOMs, and indeed most of the world, which is embracing SATCOMs, but we have the legislative initiatives, including the DDP, the state aid guidelines, etc., which are expressly excluding it. I can only hope that it's in error and that it will be connected, but it shows an inconsistency, which I believe is something that the Commission expressly said they wanted to overcome when they launched their digital path. Finally, I feel that what we're seeing is ignoring all the market developments that I've talked about, many of which allude to integrated systems. This is exactly what was intended with a network of networks for 5G. So I struggle to see how a narrowly defined speed target fits with that concept. Our message would be that the Commission needs to ensure that its DDPP does not become a theoretical Brussels-based exercise, which is detached from reality, but that it really starts looking at what is actually happening in the market and make sure that what is being written down in the different legislative initiatives reflects that, supports it, and fosters further market development, including for the satellite sector. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
George, you okay? Perfect.
Hello. Thank you very much. That was a fascinating view, and I think, Artie, you made the case that this is it's about a well-crafted technology mix that can help to meet the ambitious targets, and I think that will give rise to more questions and more discussions. So thank you. That was very helpful. And let's now move on to Marit Palovirta, and Marit will provide us, among other things, insights about the state of play of 5G deployment from operators' perspective, and what is the current state of 5G means for users, meaning services for consumers and industry verticals. Marit, the floor is yours.
Marit, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, George, for the kind introduction. And really a pleasure to be here this morning with all of you. So I'll try and provide some insights from the operator's point of view of where we are today with 5G, both in terms of coverage and penetration and uptake, but also then in reality, in terms of practical services, what's available. And finally, then I'll try and conclude by providing a couple of ideas for remaining policy needs. So first of all, we very much support and appreciate the approach that the European Commission has taken with this Digital Decade policy program and the vision as a whole, and especially the fact that we are now looking at the digital targets as a part of a wider connectivity ecosystem. And also then the policy framework hopefully will be reflecting that fact. Now, the targets are ambitious, of course, and to that end, I will try and provide a little bit of indication on where we are today with 5G. And some of you probably know that at ETNO annually we publish a report, State of Digital, and this is a report that is due to come out in the next week or 10 days. I'm not able to yet still provide the final numbers, but I will give some indication of the type of progress that we made in the past year. So what is very clear is that 5G deployment is moving very fast right now. And 5G coverage in the end of 2021, so end of last year, was at around, according to the new numbers, at around 60% mark. And this is still a little bit lower than what we're seeing in other parts of the world. So in the US, we are already around the 90% mark. In Japan, it's around the 80% mark. But this is still a huge jump from the year before. And some of you may recall that according to the same study that is carried out by Analysis Mason, at the end of 2020, we were at about 30%. So I think we can say that 5G is clearly off the ground now. And in many European countries, this is being seen very practically. And there are now 5G services widely available, especially in densely populated areas. However, we are still seeing a little bit of uphill in terms of the 5G penetration, or in other words, uptake. We have not, and I'm again quoting the numbers, the upcoming numbers, but we had not yet reached 10% in terms of uptake in Europe in the end of 2021. And this is mainly due to the lag that we have in uptake of smart devices. So whether it's smartphones or other 5G compatible devices, this seems to be going a little bit slower than what we had expected. Now, this then leaves us, of course, in a situation today where we have a big gap between the 60% mark of coverage and availability on one hand, and on the other hand, then the less than 10% uptake. And while we do believe, of course, that this is a transitory situation and we will be moving upwards with both of these numbers, it could have an impact on operators' capacity to invest and to roll out further 5G unless we, do the due diligence and address these concerns at this very moment. And also it could have an impact, of course, on service availability. So not only operators, provision of services, but potentially services that would be provided by third parties. And if we look at the 5G development now practically, so what are users available to get today? And I'm here looking at this from the operator's revenue point of view. And the operator's revenue show that mobile broadband access remains still the main use case for 5G. We are not yet seeing the full impact of vertical industry use cases. We do see a good development happening in some of the industry sectors in terms of 5G uptake, and especially automotive and smart buildings are doing very well here and are rather advanced. They are closely followed by things such as tracking applications, so in different contexts, and also the utilities sector. Now, while the development of the technical solutions and business models is taking time, especially for these vertical industry solutions, we do see and we do project a solid growth curve in this respect as well between now and 2030. And I would really like to emphasize that operators continue to invest significant resources into developing and trialing vertical services and applications with several industry partners and different industry partners from across the different verticals. Now, with this situation and state today, I wanted to touch a little bit also on the policy needs that we would still have to support 5G deployment and development as we go further. So as I already said, the Digital Decade Program, we believe, provides a nice framework, nice policy framework to assess and address some of these remaining policy hurdles. And Rita was also alluding to the fact that, in fact, many of the policy tools are already in place and they are, let's say, known policy priorities also from our point of view, and typically also support connectivity in general and not only 5G. And this is, of course, the case of spectrum policy, which is still, of course, foundational for us, the operators, to be able to put out those services, 5G services, but also then the investment-friendly transposition of the European code, the Code for Electronic Communications, remains key. Similarly, different cost reduction measures that are being worked on at the moment are very important. On the demand side, skills, funding certainly play a key role. Now, in terms of 2022, and what are the things that where we would really like to see progress this year in terms of policy, I would like to name two things. And one is active network sharing. And the second one is, in general, the openness to new deployment models. And in terms of active network sharing, this is, of course, an issue and a model that has been in use for quite some time now. But we are still really looking for having a policy environment that fully recognizes the benefits of active network sharing in a consistent manner. With regards to the openness and the new deployment models, Open RAN is, of course, something that is in everybody's top of mind. And again, we would then encourage, and I think we already heard from peers that the European Commission is looking into this, but also encourage the policymakers in general to look into this and to keep an open mind. And this is certainly something that ETNO members are doing at the moment. In terms of competition policy, ease of collaboration between telecoms and other vertical stakeholders is key, and there are still things that could be done to facilitate this collaboration. And then last but not least, security and environmental sustainability. I think that needs to be everybody's top of mind as we continue deploying 5G, and it's something that will not go away. So just to conclude, I think the key message would be that what we need is consistency between the rather ambitious political or policy targets for connectivity and then the existing and new policy tools that we will be seeing in the next year or two. So these two need to be in balance and need to match so that we can then together help boost both the supply and the demand side for 5G and connectivity in general. Thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to George.
Thank you, Mari. That was a very impressive listing of all the different things the industry has on its plate. And I think there is still a lot to do to deliver, to put it in the words of peers. Thank you. Last but not least, I'm now asking Jean-Pierre Faizan to give us his view on the role of independent wireless infrastructure operators for accelerating the 5G rollout. Jean-Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Georg, and good morning, everyone. This morning, I think we're dealing about the 5G rollout, and 5G rollout will happen one radio site after another, as has been highlighted by previous speakers and Mary in particular. It's not an effort for only one stakeholder. There are many, but here I would like to give the viewpoint of the European wireless infrastructure operators, and we see three challenges to 5G everywhere, but we also fortunately see concrete levers to achieve that. And we'll see also as a conclusion that Europe is on its way towards this very efficient infrastructure sharing model. But first, in the next slide, I'd like to show what is European Wireless Infrastructure Association and what we do. We are the trade association for European independent wholesale wireless infrastructure providers. Independent meaning that none of our members is owned or controlled by one or several MNOs. Our members invest in long-term, high-quality shared telecom infrastructures, the kind that you see on this slide, for instance, masts, but also rooftops, or distributed antenna systems to feed stadiums, small cells, parking lots, and all that. This infrastructure, mostly passive infrastructure, is shared under the neutral host model, the customers being the wireless service operators, such as the MNOs, but also the critical and emergency services, IoT service operators, or industry verticals. Next slide, please. Now, coming back to the 5G everywhere objective. First, of course, we are very happy that in the digital compass, the infrastructure dimension has been highlighted. And we see that as a very important milestone. But to achieve the objective of 5G everywhere, we see three necessary conditions. One is technical. Basically, we need more towers where there are none, or if there are, we need stronger antennas. And in urban areas, we need also more small cells. The second necessary condition is timing, because infrastructure is only one dimension of what is to be achieved. As we see, there are three other dimensions. And so the infrastructure needs to be ready much in advance if all the 2030 targets are to be achieved in Europe. The third target necessary condition is financial. There needs to be investment. Of course, we have been presented with the importance of state aid and public support, but there's also need for private investment, which needs to be encouraged by a favorable regulatory environment. Fortunately, and that's the next slide, we see three levers to make that happen in a concrete manner. The first one is the efficiency through the neutral host sharing model, which actually makes it easier to roll out this denser or more extensive infrastructure, because basically the total cost of ownership is reduced, and thus bringing economics, but also facilitating coverage where it was not previously economic. The second leverage is that quick and open access allows very quick time to market, especially if the sites are already designed to be connected, fiber connected small cell distributed antenna systems, sometimes including edge computing elements, backhauling, and fiber to the tower. The third lever is the capacity that our industry and our members have to raise investments through their own cash flow generating capability, and also through access to infrastructure funds, which are different source of funding than the normal investors in telecommunications. So we are basically able to bring in new funds, which can then be engaged either in site creation, that's the build to suit, or that can flow back to the MNOs, for instance, in site buyback and mutualization. In both cases, this is either capex which are avoided, or money which can be used for other investment in 5G, other aspects of 5G services. Next slide, please. This slide shows that we are actually on our way towards an efficient shared infrastructure model. The chart shows as a crude benchmark a comparison between the various regions of the world in terms of outsourcing to independent wireless infrastructure operators. We're talking about passive infrastructure, and there's no magic number as to what the outsourcing level should be. But what we can see from this chart is that first, it's a proven business model globally. Second, we can see that Europe is moving and there is a strong dynamics. The share of infrastructure outsourced to independent towercos in Europe has risen from 20% in mid-2020 to 33% at end 2021. Those figures are coming from the EY Parthenon report that we regularly commission, and the next issue is supposed to get out in the next 10 days or so. Only in 2017, the market share was 17% in Europe, so we were totally off the chart. Now we're in 33%, gaining traction, and there is a huge benefit associated to that, which is that over 15 billion euros of capital have been released by acquisition of tower portfolio from MNO since 2018. So basically, what the promise somehow of this new business model is being delivered, and the numbers, as you can see, are quite significant. In conclusion, and that will be the last slide, please. In conclusion, we see the 5G value chain as quickly evolving. Independent wireless infrastructure is part of it. and policymakers and industry need to cooperate so that we can reach the level of ambition set in the digital decade. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Jean-Pierre. I think that was a very helpful overview, what you provided regarding the role of the independent infrastructure providers. And this is, again, a lot of food for thought and for our discussion. In the meantime, there is a very busy traffic of questions coming up in the chat room. And I would like to start with one question which I found particularly interesting. The question was, satellites need to be an integral part of 5G strategies. Could Rita and Annemarie please give their thoughts on this? Maybe Rita, you would like to start with that?
Yes, so indeed, a very good question. And so indeed, for us, satellites are a relevant part of our strategy. One important element to signal is that in the CEF work program that was adopted in December and in the calls that were published in January, there is a clear possibility also for financing under the CEF program of the terrestrial parts of satellites. So in that sense, they are part of our 5G strategy. Now, in the context of the broadband guidelines, I can reveal you the debate about this. You will see also recognition of the importance and the value of satellites. If you look at this in the context of the targets of the digital decade, of course, we want to land in 2030 with gigabit connectivity for every citizen and business. And then there's a question mark whether satellites can bring that. Now, they can have a very useful and important role, as was extensively discussed. But the question mark essentially is, if we have satellite connections that are not gigabit ready, do we risk that there will be some far out areas where there will be satellite connection, but never anything more, so that instead of closing the digital divide, we are maintaining it? I think that's the fundamental question to discuss. But let me underline in the broadband guidelines, certainly you may respond, I would say, but the consultation is still open. So I think it's the colleagues of DG Comp who are conducting the consultation. They would certainly be open to read the positions on this.
Annemarie?
Well, maybe just to highlight a few points that I think Rita also touched upon. Yes, I do think we all agree that satellite is an important part of the 5G ecosystem, because 5G in itself is a coherent network of a coherent set of different technical standards, of course. But the only value that it adds is when you make business models from it, and you have a whole ecosystem of connectivity and models running on 5G. And satellite, I do think, is an integral part of that, and it is especially important when you talk about security, as Artie has done, and when you talk about the digital divide. That is one aspect in which I think we are all much more aware of the fact that also in the 5G debate and in the future of the digital future of Europe, technology neutral does mean that we take a much more serious look to the possibilities of satellite. Having said that, the definition of a very high capacity network is what it is, and we have seen the next generation networks. I do think that it is very important that we are being as specific as we can be in what a technology needs to be able to deliver in order to be called a very high capacity network. Otherwise, we will remain too vague and cannot really harmonize our regulatory frameworks. So I think we do. It is important that we do separate those two dimensions. So what you need to be a very high capacity network on the one hand, on the other hand, what do we need in the complete ecosystem to make sure that we help further the digital future of Europe?
Thank you, Anne-Marie. We got a lot of interesting questions, and fortunately, the organizer gave us 5 minutes more to discuss these questions and to make the session interactive. The second point I wanted to take up is there was a question raised from Kirilo Primak from Cullen International to Rita. Could you please say a few more words about the status of RSPP's review? And he also said apologies if he would miss it.
Yes. So you probably know that the RSPG has issued an opinion on the RSPP on a possible review, having a positive view on elements that could be revised and changed. Our perspective currently is that we look at the possibility to review the RSPP in the context of the digital decade. And you may also have noticed that in the digital decade policy program, as we have currently proposed it, we also propose that reporting by the member states will also comprise reporting on spectrum. So we would in particular want or invite member states to report on the availability of spectrum, and that could then bring the Commission to help creating a more transparent situation with respect to the availability of spectrum, and also potentially be the basis for the development of roadmaps in this area by member states. There could, for instance, also be a database supporting the information with respect to the availability of spectrum. So this is now the area that we're looking at. We're certainly not excluding that there will be a new RSPP, but for the moment we want to give priority to the discussion with the member states in the context of the Digital Decade Policy Program, and that discussion is fully ongoing.
Thank you, Rita.
Allow me to respond to the satellite points that were made earlier, please.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I do think it's important that we don't gloss over this. We are in a period essentially of recovery as we're coming out of the pandemics and lockdowns, we hope. And I know we're only talking about a few million European citizens. We are not. The satellite sector will never say that, oh, you need to put us on a par with fiber and we're the solution for huge chunks of Europe. But we are when it comes to extending 5G. But when you talk about connecting people who have nothing, I mean, Rita, you made the point that if we give them 30 and we allow that kind of speed, then there's a risk that it'll never get any better. So they have nothing. They have nothing. It's like telling people who are starving, oh, please wait for the Michelin star gourmet meal to arrive. I mean, bring them online. Let's have some equality of connectivity in terms of at least everybody can enter the digital era and have functioning internet. Secondly, with 5G, and we're even talking about 6G, there's a lot of assumptions made of what these technologies are going to deliver in the future. You have very high throughput satellites coming to Europe within the next 12 to 18 months. You have Orange as an anchor customer in France for Eutelsat's Connect VHTS satellite, which is going to be launched soon. You have Starlink already offering services here. It was relied on during the flooding in Germany. I mean, what does it take to future-proof your legislation? For satellite, why do we first have to prove it somehow without any support, without any policy support, before the legislation will recognize it? You're not going to review your state aid guidelines every 2 years when the solutions are then a reality. You need to put you need to put the wording in now. Thanks.
Rita, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I think basically this is the discussion. There's not a lot that we can add at this very moment. I would guess that this discussion will also take place in the context of the review and the consultation. And I mean, just to be complete, I mean, it's not that satellites are outside of our policy. On the contrary, they are inside the CEF working program, and we are certainly open to financing of the terrestrial parts of satellites. So it's not that they are neglected.
Okay, thank you. We got another question it's from Dean Bubley, and I think it's a tricky question. I'm not sure who is going to take it. Are there going to be any specific targets for the version of 5G being deployed by MNOs and member states? initial 5G release 15 standalone networks are really 4G plus only. Will there be an aggressive and specific targets for availability of release 16, 17, or 18 to enable verticals and advanced use cases? It doesn't seem that we are in the...
Shall I maybe give my limited take on that? I mean, if you talk about spectrum coverage obligations, this is still obviously very much a matter for the member states. So it will be for the member states to decide that. Now, in the context of the revision of the broadband guidelines, there, if you talk about whether there's a market failure, an important question is indeed what are the market needs. So in this context, this question on what level of 5G is needed in a specific market, and does this justify the grant of state aid? That's a very prominent question, and that is currently being discussed.
Just maybe, George, from the operator side, if I may. So I see where the question is coming from, because there are, of course, 5G deployment is a gradual process. And I think we're only, even though it's going fast now, we're only in the beginning of this process, as I was saying earlier as well. But I don't really think that's any aggressive or specific targets with regards to the different releases, whether it's standalone or for different vertical services, would really serve the wider policy goals, let's say. So we are quite happy with the targets as they are today. I think that gives us the ambition and paints the picture in a way. And then the technical, let's say, progress will take us as it becomes available, will take us then further. And of course, the quality of the services will improve in the course of the coming years.
Thank you. We got a very interesting question from a gentleman from SNCF, the French railway company. And he mentioned that for rural or topographically difficult areas, what is needed, in your opinion, to interest MNOs in extending their coverage in these regions without a real business case, even with national or European aids like CEF Digital supporting the construction of a passive infrastructure. And he's specifically asking for the CEF corridor deployment along railway tracks, for example. Maybe, Jean-Pierre, do you want to elaborate on this a little bit?
Yes, thank you, Gerard. Yeah, I think that's that's really one of the cases where the infrastructure sharing model may be the very appropriate responses. And in many cases, we have some of our members deploying infrastructure, I would say, in advance of the market. That is, they won't go with all their customers. They need probably to have one customer to start, because it's very difficult to start if there is no customer at all. But then we can take the risk to basically start the infrastructure with a very with an easier case for the first coming MNO, for instance, and hopefully if one comes, the others will join. And we have some examples along the railway lines, for instance, in some countries, and also in some of the 5G rail elements, for instance.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And that reminds me, the role of coverage obligations in particular for challenging areas. So meaning for areas which are non-economic per se, because they will never become economic at any time in future. So what can operators do? What can policymakers do? And what can regulators do to look at this and design and craft specific coverage obligations? Annemarie, a question for you in that context. I remember back in 2018, BEREC published a report on which kind of coverage obligations have been used by the member states and how effective they were. I think it would be a good idea for BEREC to take this issue up again now after a couple of years, and many things have happened in the meantime. There were auctions with specific incentive schemes for covering uneconomic areas. I remember there was the second 5G auction in Austria, where the regulator has set out a very, very well-crafted incentive scheme, which provides discounts for those operators which were able or willing to cover these areas. That would be a good idea to have a second look at this situation. But besides this, anybody else who want to respond to that question? I think it's a very challenging one.
Maybe, Georg, just to, as you said, coverage obligations have been around in the spectrum issuing of regulators already for a long time. But we do see that with 5G, there is a growing that the demands are increasing. And as you mentioned, the Austrian example is like we have, I think, a wide range of instruments to make sure that the coverage is actually there. And of course, the quality of the coverage has to increase also to make sure that the quality of standards that we need for effective 5G are actually met. So coverage obligations are one thing. The other is infrastructure sharing. We have talked about passive sharing. We have talked about active sharing. And I do think that we all agree that we need better market dynamics. So this is something we have to get our head around. Given the stage that we're in now with the issuing of frequency and the startup, as Marit said, we're only at the beginning, but I do think it will be very wise to address again what is actually happening and being used in every country to make sure that these coverage standards are met. And this will always be a mix of state aid, of sharing, of obligations, and very much depends on the kind of area. Are you in such a corridor? Are you in a rural area where it is very difficult to get the infrastructure? Or are you in a densely populated area where there is already a long tradition of 3G and 4G? Or are you somewhere where satellite may be an option? So I think it is in that mix that we all have to make sure that we get the proper instruments in place.
If I may
respond to that?
Yeah.
So, Marit?
Yeah, please. So I'll be quick, Artie, so that you can have a say as well. So just to build on Anne-Marie's statement, I think that indeed there's a whole portfolio of different options. And I think one thing that is not being debated is the importance of having connectivity in the rural areas now, and especially this is the case with the COVID. So now it's just a matter of harmonizing a little bit, coordinating and organizing the options, the policy options, but also the market-based options that we have to address this issue. And I think that from the industry side, of course, we think that the first go-to solution should be, as Jean-Pierre was saying earlier, the kind of market-led solutions. So whether it's physical infrastructure sharing or active network sharing. Also, there are many new solutions like the fixed wireless access that could be used in rural scenarios, etc. So that's one thing. And on the policy side, then of course we are fully endorsing funding tools for these market failure areas. Also, Rita mentioned the state aid review, very, very important, in fact, to encourage deployment in these areas. Also, other tools like broadband cost reduction directive, again, provide some avenues, let's say, to address these areas. So I think we have a whole host of different tools already available, and it's just a matter of kind of aligning them.
Thank you, Marit. So we have only 2 minutes left, and 1 minute for Artie and 1 minute for Rita, and then I'm closing.
Thanks very much, Georg. I'll be quick. I think in terms of being creative in designing coverage, you need to look at what's happening, the trends. Look, the UK back already 10 years ago suffered devastating flooding. And in the wake of it, the government put its emergency services network in place, which was basically reinforcing the telecommunications network as it was. So they required BT to meet 95% coverage targets and make their networks more resilient. BT did that by using satellite. They've integrated satellite across 1,000 sites in their network in the UK. Look, we've had all of this flooding in Europe as well, just in the last year. It's terrible. So Inform Europe's first conference during the lockdown, they did a survey of participants saying, what do you think COVID has highlighted the greatest need for? And the most people said resilience. So based on what we've seen, based on the experience of companies like BT, who are since then seeing massive benefits from this, they said that by putting satellite in there, it has significantly increased the uptime of their network, and it allows them to provide more critical services going forward. So shouldn't regulators be looking at ensuring these kind of coverage obligations and resilience, even more fundamentally, across the board in the EU?
That's a very good point. So one last word for Rita, and then I'm closing.
Yeah, so I just wanted to pick up on this element of sharing, indeed, that was mentioned by Jean-Pierre and also by others, and also raised by Marit as an issue where further developments need to take place. So I think indeed we also see very much the use of sharing, certainly in situations like these, like corridors, but also airports, harbors, all kinds of places where it's not so easy to build a network and maintain a network on your own. Now, I think also we should not forget that there is already quite some let's say, regulation or positive policy context on this. Now, first of all, there are the BEREC guidelines that are quite clear and also quite, I would say, fit for purpose. And there's the code that allows member states to encourage passive sharing and in some further going cases, even active sharing. And there's the connectivity toolbox that has a section that clearly highlights the beneficial elements of sharing. Now, we also know that in the competition area, there are some, I would say, positive developments in terms of cases that are being looked at. And there's a review of the horizontal guidelines. So with any hope, there will be enough, let's say, experience also within the Commission on this analysis that it will be possible to look at these elements also in a regulatory context. But basically, I think sharing in many cases is something that is looked at very positively, both from a policy and a competition point of view.
Thank you, Rita. And it's now time for me to thank our great speakers for your views and the interesting debate we are having here, and our audience for the interest in this exciting matter. I think the discussion will go on, and I wish you all an interesting further conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
George, thank you very much. And I'd like to echo my thanks to all of our panelists here, to our expert panel. Discussions that could have continued for a lot longer. So I'm sorry that we do have to draw that to a close, but I'm sure a lot of those issues that have been raised are going to be covered in the sessions that are going to be coming up over the next 2 days. But George, thank you very much to you, and thank you to all our panelists for a great start to this year's conference. So thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So that's it for the first panel. But we're going to have a short break now, and then following that, we're going to be moving straight on to our next session. So the next session is going to be looking at something that has been covered to an extent during Pierce's presentation, and also the first panel there, looking at public funding of 5G deployment, looking at the 5G corridors, and generally encouraging that cooperation and the funding aspects related to that. So that's going to be starting. We'll probably delay it by about 5 minutes, the start of that, because we are running just a little bit behind. So you'll have about 10 minutes or so to go and stretch your legs and to grab a coffee. And we'll be back here at 5 to 11 for that next session, for session 2. So thank you very much to George and the panelists once again. Thank you to Pierce as well for his keynote presentations. And we'll see you back here in around about just over 10 minutes for our next session. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, my name is Calvin Bahir, and I'm a Principal Economist at GSMA Intelligence. I have the pleasure to invite you to watch our showcase, where my colleague Caroline Butler will present the findings of our new study that explains how policymakers can carry out a socio-economic cost-benefit analysis for different authorization models for the 6 GHz frequency band. This includes both licensed and unlicensed options. It also presents the results of applying such an analysis for 12 countries. You can find the showcase on the on-demand area of the platform, and we hope you find it useful and interesting. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Egon Schulz from Huawei Munich Research Center in Germany. 6G is a common vision of our ICT industry future. 6G will the future platform for everything we do in our daily life and work. 6G is global. We are excited that we will have the opportunity to participate shaping 6G with our friends and partners in the European research community. Europe will play a leadership role to create 6G. Thank you for your attention.
My name is Filippo Gianti from Qualcomm. 2022 is the year of 5G millimeter wave in Europe. Decisions will be made by key countries, key operators, and key device vendors to roll out this technology. Using both 5G millimeter wave and mid-band, operators can offer the multi-gigabit speeds and the massive capacity required in what is a video-first, uplink-driven, post-pandemic world. I will show you how operators can increase up to 8% their annual revenue by rolling out 5G millimeter wave in these high-density, everyday locations, while saving up to 75% of their costs. Join me for this exciting showcase in the on-demand area.
Hi, my name is Marta Suarez. I am the president of the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, and I'm very excited to participate in this event and also to invite you to our showcase entitled Ensuring Wi-Fi Connectivity in a Digitally Connected Gigabit European Society. In that showcase session, we are going to cover the last updates, and we're going to talk about the technology that's omnipresent in our lives, that is Wi-Fi, and why it is so important and crucial for the next decade goals in terms of connectivity. So don't miss our session. You can find it on the on-demand area of the event platform. Thank you.